had not really wanted to do in the previous decades, not just in Massachusetts, but across the country. That is to say, we weren't going to do fuzzy math, we weren't going to do self-esteem, hands-on learning, we weren't going to do all the educational fads that had kind of migrated the country and education away from its real mission and purpose, which is academics, right? You're being fortunate enough to hear later from Sandy Stotsky, who was the architect of the standards that were the basis for those reforms in the 1990s. So, we're going to have an MCAS test as a high-stakes graduation requirement. You all know of this. And it was going to be connected to English, math, science, and history standards. Again, back to the basics. Specifically, in English, we were going to be studying English, right? Literature, poetry, drama, all these higher quality, better vocabulary texts that require kids to read through the lines and really analyze things. It also has the benefit of teaching kids about citizenship, as about drama, about tragedy, about love, about friendship. Literature teaches us about the things that bind us together as human beings. Because as a man, a couple years ago, wrote a book called The Storytelling Animal, human beings are the storytelling animal. Whether you're in a courtroom, or whether you're a politician, or whether you're in business, often the people that tell the best story, they usually succeed, right? But it's these stories going back to antiquity that bind us together as human beings. It defines us of what we are as human beings, right? And those were embedded in the standards that Dr. Stotsky developed, okay? On the mathematics side, we learned all the best lessons from California and South Korea and Hong Kong and Singapore, all the high standard, high performing states and countries. And the big lesson, and 15,000 pieces of research make this clear since then, is that you have to have access to Algebra 1 in the 8th grade. Because if you have access to Algebra 1 in the 8th grade, then kids can get on a trajectory where they can take higher level mathematics by the time they graduate from high school, so that they're able to enter college prepared to be in the STEM fields, so science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, right? So that was the basis, right? So this was ed reform. The money, MCAS, high academic standards, teacher testing. Teachers are going to be held to the same high level of expectations on academic material as the students, right? We added some charter schools in there to inject some choice and competition into the equation. So this configuration, this law in 1993, really has turned out to be a historic accomplishment. Because while the rest of the country has continued to be stuck in stagnation and decline, Massachusetts' performance has gone to the roof. Specifically, there's a test called the NAEP test. It's the National Assessment of Educational Progress. It is the nation's report card. It has been around for about 30 or 40 years. Every state takes it. They take it every couple of years, right? No state in the history of that test has been number one in every grade tested and every category tested. And in 2005, really only a few years after the standards and the testing were put into place, guess what state in the union was number one in every category tested and every grade tested? Massachusetts, right? And then we did it again in 2007, 2009, 2011, 2013. No state has done it once. We've done it 5 times in a row. I say that it's like winning the World Series 5 times in a row and doing it in 4 straight games every single time. It's a remarkable accomplishment. The teachers, the principals, the taxpayers, the lawmakers, policymakers that made this happen have given us a gift that the rest of the country doesn't enjoy. And it really has made us the marvel of the rest of the country. But as I mentioned, in that Nation at Risk report in 1983, the goal for the 21st century is not just competing with Arkansas or Mississippi or Louisiana. It's competing with Hong Kong and Singapore, and South Korea and Japan. You got to compete with the high-performing, largely East Asian countries in order to compete in the 21st century, particularly in the area of mathematics. So in 2007, Massachusetts was one of only 2 states in the Union that tested as its own individual country on a test called the TIMSS test, which is the gold standard of international math and science tests. Guess what? Massachusetts was at the top or near the top in math and science, 4th and 8th graders, compared with the best countries in the world. Specifically, 8th graders tied for #1 in the world in science, right? A remarkable, remarkable accomplishment, right? If winning being #1 on the NAEP test is like winning World Series, this is like winning Olympic gold medals. And guess what? We did it again in 2013. So in 2009, when the U.S. Department of Education, the Obama administration, was talking about a federal grant program for $4.3 billion to have states sign on to compete for that money, it wasn't the race to the top. It was the race to become Massachusetts. And they had to have Massachusetts as the trophy that they put on that mantelpiece so that all the other states would fall into line. So Pioneer Institute, where I work, is an independent, nonpartisan think tank. We've been around for about 20 years or so. Our former executive director was the chair of the Board of Ed when ed reform was being pushed in the mid to late 90s, and is the current Secretary of Education in the Baker administration. And we're pretty much known for calling it like we see it. We are independent. We have, 3/4 or 80% of our funding comes from independent donors. There's no deep-pocketed foundation that's paying us for our opinions on this topic. So in 2010, when Common Core began to come down through the Governors Association and the Council of Chief State School Officers, we said, someone better take a look at these standards. We got the most to lose. So we enlisted Dr. Stotsky, who had worked on the standards in not only Massachusetts, but in a variety of other states. Even the Common Core advocates will tell you. That lady over there sitting in the center of the table, or the center of chairs, she has credibility on this topic that nobody else in the country has. And that's just a fact, right? In fact, the advocates of Common Core, prior to Common Core, used to rely on her for her judgments on grading the standards all over the country. We coupled Sandy with a guy named Jim Milgram, internationally renowned professor of mathematics at Stanford University. What's unique about Professor Milgram is that not only is he an accomplished mathematician in his own right, but he's actually one of the few mathematicians that cares about K-12 education standards too. And he was the architect of the very high-quality California math standards. So we got Sandy, we got Milgram, and then we got a guy named Zev Werman, who was a Silicon Valley engineer and a businessman who had also worked on the California math standards. And what we asked them to do, and they did this in 4 consecutive crosswalks of every draft of Common Core, we said, what's your scholarly opinion of the quality of Common Core against high standard states like Massachusetts, Indiana, Minnesota, Texas, California? And what these experts found is that at every step of the way, Common Core was of lower academic quality in both English and mathematics than high standard states. So for Massachusetts, Common Core was not going to be a race to the top. It was going to be a race to the middle. That was very clear, and it was cleared out back in 2010, even in the face of the State Board of Education adopting Common Core in the summer of 2010. When all of you were at the beach or relaxing and having a barbecue, that's when they decided it was a good idea to turn their back on the 20-year commitment that this state had made under ed reform to higher academic standards and expectations. Specifically, Common Core cut the classic literature and poetry and drama that I talked about earlier as being really the secret sauce for our historic successes in reading, right? So you're going to look in vain in Common Core for Huckleberry Finn, for Sherlock Holmes, for Dickens, these higher quality pieces of literature that matter really so much to the intellectual development of kids, but also to their spiritual development, if you will, right? They also ignored the Common Core authors, also ignored the evidence from Massachusetts and California and high standards countries, and decided to cut the commitment to Algebra 1 at the 8th grade. They said, well, we're going to just move it forward a grade or two, so it'll be late 9th or early 10th grade. So the fact is that under Common Core, not only students in Massachusetts, but kids across the country are going to be about 2 years behind their international competitors in the area of mathematics. They also, the Common Core writers, inserted an experimental form of geometry that had never been successful in any place it's been tried. And they really top out at what they call Algebra 2 Light, which is really a mathematical path to nowhere if your child is interested in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, right? A remarkable lack of attentiveness to facts, data, research, and evidence, and the performance of this state and all the high-performing states and countries. The next piece of research we looked at was the legality, because as I mentioned at the beginning, the fact is that people across the spectrum have known that there are federal laws that prohibit the